Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ben Lovett. I'm an associate professor in TC's School Psychology program, and I'm the director of TC's Institute for Psychological Science and Practice, IPSP. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our Psychology at TC conference. We highlight student research in psychology-related areas across TC. This year, over 50 students uploaded presentations, either posters or video talks, and most have been conducting Q&A sessions over the past 3 hours. I just want to open by briefly thanking the many people who made this event possible. To our student presenters, thank you for submitting your work, and I hope you enjoyed interacting with attendees. To Provost Stephanie Rowley, thank you for your support, including continued funding of IPSP and its mission. To the Psychology Faculty Coordinating Committee, PFCC, and in particular the Conference Planning Subcommittee, Christine Cha, Brian Keller, and Matt Zajac. They all did a great deal of work under short deadlines to make this a great event, and part of me is actually going to miss our late night email chains about all this stuff. Finally, to Teachers College IT for their responsiveness and assistance throughout planning and now during the event. I hope that all of the attendees had a chance to interact with our great student researchers. I myself went to meet with students who did research on psychotherapy, early childhood special education, and the neuropsychology of multiple sclerosis, among other things. Now it's time for our main event, really a series of culminating activities for our conference. We begin with something that's new this year, an award that IPSP is bestowing on a distinguished alum. This award is made possible through the John W. Hyland Jr. Innovation Fund. We are proud to celebrate former Board of Trustees co-chair Jack Hyland's legacy through this award as it relates to his goal of fostering excellence and innovation across the depth and breadth of the college. This year's psychology faculty had the chance to nominate distinguished alums from their programs, and the winner out of a slate of truly distinguished options was Dr. Eric Storch, a 2003 graduate of our clinical psychology program. Dr. Storch holds several faculty and administrative titles, including Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and Vice Chair and Head of Psychology at Baylor College of Medicine. He is one of the world's experts on anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and related problems, focusing on pediatric populations. It would be difficult to exaggerate his prolific nature. He has over 700 publications on these and related topics, and a remarkable record of funding of his empirical research as well. We are grateful for his delivering a brief talk on his research on how to advance treatment in child psychiatry. Welcome, Dr. Storch.
Well, thank you so much. This is truly an incredible honor. I'm thrilled to be here. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna share screen and hopefully not bore folks too much. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done and really reflect a little bit on sort of where we started, but also some of the mechanisms, the things that have helped us out, to try to achieve what we've done. So in this case, it's thinking about our work in kiddie OCD and anxiety and lessons learned, but then what those reflections are. Some disclosures as we're taught to include. But I think back to, when I started at TC, it's 1998, I have a full head of hair, and I was able to eat pizza about 6 or 7 times a week without gaining weight. And as we can see, a lot of those things have definitely changed. But when I started, I had this idea that I was going to go into private practice. I was absolutely going to be a New Yorker because God forbid you ever leave New York. And then I wanted to focus on bullying. And so that was kind of how I came in, and it quickly changed. I find myself in Florida and having a chair who is now my current chair, telling me that I need to pick an actual diagnosis if I want to get research funding, and doing sort of the exact opposite of private practice. And that's really worked. Now, when we thought about some of our efforts, the field back then was just so different when we were talking about childhood OCD. I mean, we didn't even know what worked. We didn't, certainly couldn't get it to folks. And it was just sort of the Wild West in terms of psychological care for adults or kids who had OCD or related conditions. And so our first efforts were really hitting on these questions of what works, how do we know it works, and then how do we try to get some of it out there in different service delivery models. So we had a series of NIH-funded grants that started to address this. And I'll admit, I came in as a psychologist thinking, well, we know cognitive behavioral therapy is really effective. It's going to beat everything. And, that chip on my shoulder, I think, was helpful being in a department of psychiatry. One of our first trials looked at if we compared kids who receive with OCD who receive behavioral therapy with a placebo versus behavioral therapy with sertraline, what happened? And what we found was that it actually didn't matter. That with a placebo control of the medication, we saw really group equivalents. And the other thing we saw within this trial was really the side effects that kids would have related to the antidepressant in terms of timing, and then how you can mitigate that by going with a slower dose of sertraline. Now, concurrent to this, we're also looking at different service delivery models, as well as different topologies of OCD. And so on the left was one of actually my first randomized controlled trials that we looked at different ways of approaching treatment from an intensive fashion, so 5 days a week for 3 weeks versus that standard, once a week over a period of about 3 months. And then on the right, we took a group of kids who had something called PANDAS. So this OCD that was linked temporally to a strep infection, which was believed to be associated with its etiology, and looking at how they responded for an intensive intervention, where we found that they ended up doing quite well. Now, finally, the question that it always sort of drives me is how do we help every child? And a lot of the times we are getting these kids in Gainesville who had just struggled. They had tried everything and the parents are at wit's end. And so we ended up developing one of the first intensive outpatient programs that really addressed this and seeing that intervention was really, really helpful. Now, what we also did within this table was look at what became quite relevant to today as a webcam study. And so we opened up this one trial where we thought we would get kids from Florida to Skype in, because that was what we used. There's no Zoom then. And what we found was actually that almost no one from Florida came, but we had kids from all over the world. And so this is before there's any real clarity on laws. And so we just kind of kept doing it. But we ended up seeing that if we provided treatment via web, kids did really well. And of course, wait lists, nothing ever works because you're sitting there waiting for treatment. But again, promising and sort of set the stage for today. Now, within all this, we learned a lot of things. So one of them was about the kids with OCD who just weren't getting better. And in one case, this involved kids who had autism spectrum disorder. And so what was really cool, and I'll talk about this briefly later, is I developed a relationship with a collaborator, a brilliant scientist named Jeff Wood, without ever having met him. We got our first 2 grants, an R34 and an R01, looking at a behavioral intervention for kids with ASD and anxiety or OCD. That was all based on our clinical observation that what we were doing normally just wasn't working. And so I think that the point about relationships is one I'll come back to, and how important it is to be open and reach out, but how you can build relationships in a way that can have an amazing amount of success and ability to better the world. But in this case, we ended up conducting a 3-site randomized controlled trial of behavioral therapy for kids with ASD and anxiety or OCD. And we found these really pronounced effects. So when we compared this more personalized approach to kind of standard care called the coping cat, we found that both worked really well, but there was absolutely an advantage for the personalized care. And then both did better than just usual care in general, which did all right. And so it gave guidance on what we want to do for treatment of this population. Now this was good, and we were excited, but that last grant, it sort of kind of just crept in, and we had a reality check. So and my siblings, who apparently have nothing else to do and are sitting on here today, can attest to this. Like, I'm not a confrontational guy. I don't, argue, but I did on this one because we got a 4th percentile on the grant. So, those of you that haven't, been in the NIH world, when you get a 4th percentile, you basically take the champagne, you pop it, and then you spray it all over the place. Not at all ashamed that that's fairly nerdy, but you're really excited. And so that's what we did. And then NIMH sends an email that says, yeah, we're probably not going to fund this. And our response was, hey, wow, I wonder what CNN would say if we just told them that, you don't want to help children with autism who have anxiety, that my peers thought this grant was great. And so it magically was transferred to another institute and funded right away. But what NIMH was saying was a really important lesson that we should have listened to more clearly. They're saying that we don't want to test what works. We want to know why it works and then how to get it out to people. And so we started thinking a lot about that. So one of my first R01s was oriented towards trying to understand the mechanisms of exposure therapy, and then can we target it with this safe medicine called D-cycloserine. Now, the good and bad. The good is we got the grant. We helped a ton of kids. We really demonstrated that family-based exposure therapy done intensively works incredibly well, but our hypothesis wasn't proven. So, as my mentor once said, as I came in discouraged on this, he's like, no, this is great. People will actually believe you have integrity if you publish something that's a null finding. It actually didn't make me feel that much better, but over time, the pain has gone. But we also showed that well-delivered exposure therapy has very, very, very low dropout rate. And what was neat in this study, which occurred in Tampa, was that we had families coming from near Atlanta, Georgia, driving every week for this. Another came from Miami. And so it was all about how difficult it was to provide treatment, and then what we could do, when we're able to actually give a high fidelity intervention. Now, along those lines, I have a wonderful colleague named Allison Salome, who's really an innovator, and some of her work, which I was fortunate to be involved with, was focused on how do you kind of help children who have been traumatized, but have a dose-based format to treatment, where you're giving, kind of small dose to families that need a small dose. You're teaching the parents how to lead treatment so they can help their own kids. And then you step up to a more robust kind of full intervention for those that need a more full intervention. And so we've had a series of grants on this where we're looking both at why this works, as well as the cost effectiveness of this. The call I had right before was actually based on a statewide initiative in Texas, where we're starting to implement this exact model overall for childhood psychological problems, which is really exciting to think about how we can move past this, I think, a challenge to psychology of all therapy is the same, to one where it's like, no, certain things work, and we need to make sure that we're doing those things. Now, to that point, implementation science has become a major focus. So we started kind of delving into technology-assisted behavioral therapy. And so started spreading this out throughout Florida at community mental health centers, which in Florida at least, and I suspect throughout the country, oftentimes struggle to provide, again, that high fidelity, evidence-based interventional approach. And so in this case, we used a computer-assisted CBT protocol relative to usual care. And what we ended up seeing was a decent response. Our usual care was a real usual care, not a wait list. And these were in kind of real world settings. At the same time, what was interesting is that when we evaluated in the middle of treatment, there was really no response. And so this is an important piece because it made me start thinking of why things worked and getting rid of the stuff that doesn't work. And then when we started exposure therapy, that's where you saw really the reduction in anxiety. And so speaking a little bit to what are the nuances of treatment that are so critical. Now, in Texas, we've been fortunate to have a number of grants funded by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board that look at different service delivery models to help children with autism who have anxiety and OCD. And so one of our first projects, which is based on Allison's innovative work, looks at a step care kind of low intensity parent-led model where we step up kids that need more support. And we've also, together with my colleague Sophie Schneider, worked on teletherapy, which we started before COVID and has just kind of kept grooving throughout all of this. And then now, looking at how do we develop out internet-based CBT so that parents in the comfort of their own home without having to see a mental health provider can have this as a first-line treatment and kind of a low-intensity intervention in order to help. Now, concurrent to this, we've had a number of other efforts, and so I really need to work on my names because some people are just really good at having kind of certain project names. But our first first four focus on how do we use telepsych to reach out to areas that really are either underserved because of geographic access or because they're individuals in more marginalized communities. And so projects Reach and Gold involved delivering a treatment called the Unified Protocol to individuals who had struggled with Harvey and in sort of the aftermath of that. And were experiencing distress, anxiety, distress, trauma from that. Propel was taking a school that is in Houston and really is struggles with a high proportion of students who are refugees and sort of new to the country and often undocumented. And how do we support them by providing services directly into the schools? And then the TCHAT and CPAM programs are exactly that. So how do we do this more broadly within Texas? And so in the middle picture, my colleague Laura Williams is really a leader in that regard for trying to provide this telepsych directly into schools effort. And then also a consultation service for pediatricians so they can phone a psychiatrist and have immediate access to a provider. So, I was thinking about when Ben mentioned that I graduated in 2003 and first noting that I am now officially old, but also what has happened and how my career has sort of gone. What's interesting as I've arrived at Baylor is that there have been some threads that have remained, but that certain things have changed. So some of the things that have changed is some of our work remains to be clinical trials based. That's the same, but a lot is more about understanding. So we have a large grant with my boss, Wang Goodman, on deep brain stimulation. But at the same time, I started observing that DBS, deep brain stimulation, is happening in younger and younger kids. And so we came into contact with a close friend and neuroethicist, Gabe Lazaro, where we started asking these questions about what are the ethics related to DBS. And so we published a couple papers looking at this exact question of understanding parent perceptions, concerns, clinician perceptions, and so on. And then this ended up resulting in an RF1, which is an RO1 where they just give you all the money. And I'll talk about that in a quick sec. What we also did, though, is we thought about this idea of polygenic risk scores and this idea of, well, maybe we can identify risk even before you have the condition. And so talking about some of the ethical components of this, and we had a supplement to an RO1 that was funded, and we have a grant in now for submission where we're trying to understand some of the challenges or concerns about if you were a parent who's depressed, how would you feel if we could test your kid and know that there's a 10% chance they could become depressed or a 4% chance that they could have schizophrenia. And so there's an incredible emergence of technology. At the same time, we have to be mindful of the fact that if we ask a question, we're going to get an answer. And so we're trying to embark on different studies to understand that. Within the deep brain stimulation space, kids with dystonia have DBS. What we're seeing in things like Parkinson's and Huntington's is that DBS is a commonplace intervention that has excellent efficacy. In OCD, there's a human device exemption for the most refractory of cases, but it works really, really well in those cases, whereas nothing else has worked. So, part of what we were trying to understand were those ethical issues involving kids. And while it's not, anticipated to be used in OCD, hopefully in my lifetime, but it is being used in dystonia. DBS is also used in Tourette as young as 16. So understanding these kind of ethical issues is critical. And then also developing a decision aid for families of someone with dystonia is also important in order to kind of come to terms about making this decision. Now, with all this, we've also kind of ushered in some exciting current work. So, COVID's been an interesting time. We've been able to secure a number of NIH-funded grants this year, and a lot of it's exciting. So those of you who have an iPhone and use the facial recognition device, one of the things that kind of technology is doing is it's mapping onto your face and recognizing certain kind of points. But you can also use that to really understand different aspects of emotion. And so we were just awarded an R01 with my colleague, John Harrington, on exactly this point. And so in this, what we're really looking at is how we can map on to various facial features or facial movements and map those on to different affective states. And so we see this in this diagram, some of the technology in action. And that your face, when you engage in certain expressions, those expressions correspond with different emotional aspects. So for example, surprise, you like surprise. So different muscles move in a way that correspond with that affect. And so what we're trying to do is understand interpersonal synchrony, but how do we more objectively measure some of these kind of social processes and emotional processes at play? This is my middle child who was not at all scared of this little garden snake. And again, showing some of the technology, not in such a great example, but he's a super cute kid. So just wanted to show a picture of him there. So we're embarking on that piece. And then at the same time, we recently got a really exciting score on an UO1, which is a sort of a R01 that cooperates with the government, looking at collecting a number of genetic samples from Latin America. So my wife teases me that this is just an excuse to travel to South America, and frankly, she's spot on target. But it's a great opportunity to kind of take our genetic data, of which 95% of the 46,000 plus cases we have are of European ancestry, and start diversifying that. And the reason why that's so important is that if we have only a European-based sample, then our data won't be applicable to that. And so anything like polygenic risk scores that are derived will only be appropriate to that cohort and not to the majority of the rest of the world. So we received about as good of a score as you can get, and we're right now waiting with the champagne on ice to hopefully spray it on each other when we get notice of award. Now, in thinking of all this, there's some, I guess, thoughts that sort of came up, and one is on the academic side, but one is more on the kind of the life side. The academic side is thinking of the last 25 or 20 years, saying, wow, we helps with our colleagues show what works, and we've gotten a sense of why some of it works. There's still more room to understand there's a lot more room to optimize treatment. Like, how do we help someone that has an incomplete response, or how do we help someone who doesn't have any response? And so I think there's more room there, a ton of room about getting treatment to the masses. That's where one of my areas of passion really lies. Is it's not fair nor right that only a select few are able to access care. And I think that's currently the way the world operates right now. And so we need to make sure that that's in fact not the case. Some of our work through a Fulbright grant that I had brought me and my family down to El Salvador, where we were able to start disseminating some of these efforts and teaching clinicians how to engage in evidence-based forms of psychotherapy for kids struggling. And so that's just a small drop in the bucket where there's so much more that we really need to do. But at the same time, there's this question of how I get there. How do you get there? And I think one of these questions, or one of the answers, is really mentorship. I've been blessed throughout my career with incredible mentors. Starting with faculty at TC, like Barry Farber, and so really, having that opportunity to have individuals that saw something in you, hopefully the right thing in you, and then gave you that support, but also the flexibility to do your thing. That was one of the things I reflect most on and am most appreciative, about my time at TC. It was the quality training, the opportunities that only a place like New York can provide, but the flexibility to kind of be myself and pursue the things that I was really excited about. At the same time, your support network is key. So, in my case, starting with my beloved wife, who's always there. Including, hauling from Gainesville to Tampa to Texas, and just being there to support. And then, my family who, it's Friday afternoon, I think they all called out, but the fact that, they're here, or great friends are there, are what kind of, empowers you and supports you, even when, you don't get the score on the grant that allows you to spray champagne everywhere, and then check out for a week. That's what continues, even when they're kind of the low times or more challenging times, which is inevitable. Over time, I've learned the critical importance of engaging your stakeholders. So one of the NIH grants I didn't mention that we just received was a 4-year grant where we're going to work with individuals who have brittle bone disease and understand the interplay between anxiety and pain for children and adults, and then the perspective course of any behavioral health concerns. And so one of the exciting parts of this is really kind of partnering with families, individuals affected, to understand the challenges and not come in with a, I'm the researcher, I know, something, but rather to learn more. And that's one of the areas where our work has really been refined over the past decade. And then finally, relationships and collaborations. This most recent genetics grant, my co-PI, we've never met. And we sort of joke about that, but it's a really powerful thing that you're able to build relationships from people who live 1,000 miles away. And in our case, we've built relationships with people on another continent, all with the focus of science and collaboration in mind. And so those relationships that you build now are ones that persist throughout the course of your career, and are there to support you, are there to challenge you, but also allow you to kind of grow both professionally and personally. Now, this is just a slide of our team about 2 years ago, which is sort of funny. It was, we never thought it'd be so challenging to get everyone together. The part that's sort of cool about this, is that the team's grown by about 2 to 3-fold at this point. And what we also love is that, most of these folks are here for a couple years, and then they're kind of going on and changing, going on in their own careers. And so we really think a lot about that idea of how do we support individuals in kind of advancing themselves while we're conducting science. So thank you. I'm so very honored to receive this award. I'm so very happy that I ended up choosing Teachers College way too many years ago, and just really pleased to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Eric. Wonderful talk. And I think there are so many lessons for the students watching, and even for those of us who are faculty, many of us, in terms of the reflections that you had. A great example of a lot of interdisciplinary research, integrating biological and psychological approaches. So just so much that's there. And it was interesting also to hear a little bit about your background and how you weren't initially going into that area. I had looked up your dissertation out of curiosity just to kind of see where you had started. And I believe your dissertation advisor, Marla Broussard, is actually with us today.
Yeah.
She's able to join us. She retired about a year ago, but it's great to sort of bring together everyone and hear about the trajectory of your work.
Yeah, even back then, with Marla, with other faculty members, Lisa Miller, George Bonanno, it's been incredible to have those partnerships. And at the same time, one of the things I loved about my experience in New York was, I went up to the Psychiatric Institute and worked, crossed paths with the former chief, who was one of our other vice chairs at Baylor. And didn't point out that I was 22 when he was the boss up there and he's still working. I stayed away from the age thing, but that opportunity to really explore different areas, and then sort of center on the part that felt most at home, has been a great thing.
Well, thank you again for joining us, and congratulations on certainly winning and earning this year's award.
Oh, thank you so much. It's truly an honor.
Let's see, our next activity actually continues with awards. So this time the awards are to student researchers. So each of the presentations from earlier today was automatically entered into a competition. And I'm going to let Dr. Brian Keller, a TC professor in our Applied Statistics program, speak more about those awards.
Thanks, Ben. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So hopefully we're in presentation mode here. Okay, so congratulations to Dr. Storch, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. It was great to hear about first your time at TC and then what you've continued to do afterward. Thank you for that. We received about 50 presentations, 50 submissions this year. And I would say about 2/3 of them were posters and the other 1/3 were lightning talks. We are going to be presenting awards for the best poster, the best lightning talk, first place, runner-up, and honorable mention. The first place award will be associated with the $200 cash award. The first runner-up, a $100 cash award, and the honorable mentions will be associated with lots of honor. No cash award for those. So I'll briefly discuss the scoring criteria, and then we'll get into the winners. Number one, clear purpose. Here we looked for the research aims clearly describing, the research aims being clearly described and having appropriate scope. Number two was methods. So the research methods, we were looking for the methods being sufficiently described and appropriate for the study aims. In terms of the significance of this study, we were looking for the significance of this work to be justified in the context of problems in education, health, or psychology. And then finally, aesthetic. Does the presentation flow well? Is it free from errors? And does it use helpful design elements? Big thank you to our team of faculty reviewers that included Christine Cha, Barry Farber, Karen Froud, Peter Gordon, Maria Hartman, Loudon Jerome, myself, Ben Lovett, Gary Natriello, Randall Richardson Velgard, Tyler Watts, and Matt Zajic. So each presentation was rated by 2 reviewers, and the average score was taken across those ratings. Okay, now on to the awards. First, we're going to start with the poster awards and honorable mention. For the honorable mention for the poster awards, the first recipient is the predictive relationship of individuals' beliefs and attitudes on their responses to COVID-19 in the United States. This is work by Nicole Milani, Taya Vitali, and Randall Richardson Belgar. Congratulations. The second honorable mention for the poster awards is the role of agitation as a mediator in the relationship between trait perfectionism, trait perfectionism and suicidal ideation during COVID-19. And this is work by Gabriella Epstein, Anoki Bafna, Ji-Yoon Park, Megan Rogers, and Igor Gelinker. Congratulations. Next, the first runner-up for the poster awards. The first runner-up for the poster awards is Sample Reporting Practices of Clinical Trials Investigating Self-Injury Outcomes. This is work by Michael Leduc, Eleonora Guzman, and Christine Cha. Congratulations to you for winning the first runner-up for the poster awards. Next, the first prize for the poster award. First place is Piraha Infants Learn Language with Limited Direct Input, and this is joint work by Peter Gordon, Zhongyu Li, Stasha Medeiros, Jean Tang, Megan Henderson, Camilla Beraldi, and Daniel Everett. Congratulations to you. Okay, now turning over to the lightning talks. First, we'll do honorable mention for the lightning talks. Honorable mention for the lightning talk goes to Nicholas Anderson for a new partial effect size for categorical outcomes, meta-analyzing logistic regression slopes. Congratulations, Nick. Next, we're going to go to the first runner-up for the lightning talks. This is effects of parents' mealtime conversation techniques for preschool children with hearing loss who use listening and spoken language. And this is work by Elaine Smolin, Maria Hartman, Bryn Powell, Young-Sun Lee, and Angel Wang. Congratulations to you all. And last but not least, the first prize winner for the lightning talks, examining risk and protective factors among increasingly suicidal adolescents in the community. And this is work by Emily Muller, Kyun Shin, and Christine Cha. Congratulations to all of our winners and to everyone who participated in this year's conference. Thank you very much. You all helped to make this a wonderful and diverse set of talks. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Dr. Keller. And congratulations, let me express myself to all of the winners. And we will be in touch in the coming weeks about payment for those who won cash awards. Our next activity is a deeply personal one for IPSP members. Among the many tragedies of what's been, in many ways, a very difficult year, we lost a TC professor who was a former co-director of IPSP, Dr. Angel Wong. She served as a professor in our Deaf and Hard of Hearing program, and her untimely death was a blow to all of TC and to her field. Those of us at IPSP really felt that loss, and we dedicate this year's conference in her memory. As an honor to her, two faculty in the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program, Dr. Maria Hartman and Dr. Elaine Smolin, are going to be offering a tribute to Dr. Wong. Dr. Hartman, would you begin, please?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lovett. My heart is still pounding from my colleague Elaine Smolin winning the award for her lightning talk. But I'd like to thank the organizers of this meeting for providing another opportunity to honor Dr. Wong. As Dr. Lovett noted, she was an integral part of this organization from its beginning, and I feel she is with us even now. Again, as Dr. Lovett mentioned, I'm a lecturer in the program for the education of deaf and hard of hearing, and I knew Dr. Wong as both a mentor and a colleague. And there are so many things I could say right now about her brilliance and her talent and the quality of her work and her contributions to the field. But more than any of that, I'd like to recall here that her sense of the work she did and the work she helped her students and colleagues do was always about making things better for other people. And whether that meant preparing teachers to work in classrooms or preparing doctoral students to do cutting edge research or promoting the careers of her students, which she did so well, she was always very other focused. And as I listen to all the presentations today and learn about all the wonderful work that's happening at TC and the work that all of you are doing in this group, and even Dr. Storch's work, I think of how Dr. Wong, with her ultimate goal of making things better for other people, is being realized today and how proud she would be. So thank you again for the opportunity to honor her again. And my colleague Elaine Smolin will say a few words next.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you so much to Dr. Lovett and Dr. Zajic for the opportunity to talk a little bit more about Dr. Wong today. When I think about her and her legacy, I know it can be measured in many ways, and to be sure, her academic accomplishments are impressive. And when I began as her PhD advisee 5 years ago, intimidating, right? She oversaw countless research studies and authored numerous books and chapters and peer-reviewed articles. But to me, that list of publications actually tells a deeper story. Very few of her chapters or articles bear her name alone. Instead, they reveal her true legacy through the people she touched during her too short career. She collaborated on studies and writing projects with colleagues around the globe. Her list of co-authors spans disciplines from reading development to neuroscience. And this is really evident in her work with colleagues from around the college through IPSP. For nearly every publication of hers, among the list of impressive co-authors is at least one less well-known name, and that's one of her students. Dr. Wong truly championed all of us who were fortunate enough to have her as our mentor. She generously shared opportunities to write chapters, design studies, and review manuscripts that she easily could have taken credit for herself. When I think of her, I think of how happy and proud she was to be part of the et al, if it meant that was giving her students experience and exposure. I'm really not sure that she ever responded to a request to contribute to a book or consult on research without saying, sure, but only if one of my students can collaborate too. I know that she used asterisks on her CV to indicate projects with student authors. And if I did the same to highlight all the publications that came as a direct result of her sharing her own opportunities with me, nearly everything would be starred. I'm so grateful that she believed in me before I believed in myself. Dr. Wong was truly a master educator, an inspiring mentor, and a wonderful friend to students and colleagues alike. I know that she would be proud of the student-faculty collaborations that were highlighted at today's conference, and her legacy will truly live on in IPSP's continuing work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for that beautiful tribute, Dr. Hartman and Dr. Smolin. I am only in my second year here at TC, and just in getting to know Dr. Wong for a little bit over a year, I have so many wonderful stories, and I'm jealous of those who had more time with her. But again, grateful that she was able to be part of TC for so long. We're nearing the end of our program today. I'd like to conclude by just mentioning a little bit more about IPSP, especially for those of you who don't know as much about us. This past year, despite the many challenges of pivoting to mostly remote and digital work, psychology faculty at TC have continued productive and innovative research while also achieving excellence in teaching. In fact, I'll mention that both of this year's TC Faculty Excellence Awards for Teaching went to psychology faculty, Dr. Matt Zajic, as well as Dr. Dan Tomasulo. Congratulations to both of them. In the coming academic year, IPSP plans to return to its typical programming. We are hoping in person as much as health guidelines allow. And that programming includes events to support graduate students in psychology and beyond, hosting advice sessions and workshops, helping to coordinate admissions and other activities between programs. And there will be some exciting new programming as well. So stay tuned to your email for more, and we hope to see you at other events in the coming year. Have a great weekend, everyone, and thank you again for coming today to our conference.